Hey, Paul, welcome to the His and Her Money Show.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks, Talit.
We are super glad that you're here with us because, you've been through a lot, you've learned a lot, and now you're helping people to make themselves into a better position financially. And we know that you have such a wealth of knowledge, and we are so glad that you are here to share it with us today. But before we start jumping into all of the advice that you have and wisdom that you have for us, can you just take a moment to introduce yourself to everyone that's tuned in and let them know what you're all about?
You bet. So I got an engineering degree, and that was my first mistake. And then I got an MBA, and I went to Ford Motor Company in Detroit for about 5 years. And I always found myself doing things on the side, trying to figure out some kind of as they call it in real estate, a side hustle. And so I finally came up with an HR staffing firm. My buddy and I started, and it went really well. And I was finalist for Michigan Entrepreneur of the Year twice. And then we sold it only 5 years later to a publicly traded firm. And I thought my dream had come true. My ship had sailed in, I guess. And that's kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke. I had 2 kids at the time, and we didn't really want to live in Metro Detroit, so we moved to the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. We started a nonprofit organization, which was a ministry to international students studying in the U.S. And I found out that pretty quickly that this was more like semi-retirement because it was pretty easy, pretty low-key ministry, and it didn't happen as often as I wanted. So I became the worst version of myself. I became pretty grumpy father, grumpy husband. I don't think I did a very good job, and because it was more, like I said, like semi-retirement. So I started flipping houses before flipping was a thing. And over the next 15 years, I did all kinds of different things in entrepreneurial real estate and real estate investing till I got to where I am today. So that's a quick backup.
All right. Now that's quite an interesting story, but actually the story gets even more intriguing because at one point you found yourself to have over $1 million net worth, but then from there you moved to you doubled that number, but in the wrong way, to where you had over $2 million in debt. But
yes, sir.
You had a comeback story to where you went from over $2 million in debt to debt free. So I would love to hear kind of how that whole journey went about.
Well, what happened is, I had about $1.8 or $9 million in the bank after I sold my company, which seemed like a lot of money to a 34-year-old. And so we went to the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I didn't know the difference between investing and speculating, Talit.
Okay.
And so, investing is when your principal is safe and you've got a chance to make a return. And speculating is when your principal is not at all safe and you have a chance to make a return. And so I found myself thinking I was investing when I was really speculating. I was really gambling. And I was doing all kinds of crazy things, including a wireless internet company, and throwing money down a hole in the ground that was supposed to produce oil and gas that didn't, and doing all kinds of things, that were really, honestly, they weren't. I wasn't allocating my investments properly. It's fine to do high risk investing as long as it's high risk, but when you think when you think it's a sure thing and you put too much money into that, it can be really foolish. Now, Paul Samuelson is the first Nobel Prize winner in economics from the U.S., and he said investing should be more like watching grass grow or watching paint dry. Mm-hmm. If you want excitement, take $800 and go to Las Vegas. Well, I didn't understand that. So for about 10 years, for exactly a decade after I sold my company, I took on increasingly risky real estate investments, and we made a lot of money flipping high-end waterfront lots at Smith Mountain Lake in Virginia. But we didn't see the recession coming. We should have. We saw the signs, but we kind of thought, well, it's not going to happen to us for whatever reason. And so we found ourselves with about $2.5 million in debt. That included my home, and that included a vacation home, and then all these investments. When late 2007 descended upon us, and we realized the economy, especially for land and lot sales, was ground to about a halt. And so we were about $2.5 million in total debt. And my partner came to me and said, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep making these interest payments. January 1st, I'm signing the company over to you, which meant he was signing over all the rest of the debt to me because it didn't look like we were going to be able to sell these. And so I was meditating, sitting in my chair one morning, meditating, and it was a Sunday morning, I remember, Talit, and I thought, WWGMD. And the thought came to me really clearly. And that doesn't mean what would grandma do? That means what would George Mueller do? George Mueller was a pastor, and he was a hellion turned missionary pastor from Germany to England in the early 1800s. And he lived through pretty much the rest of the century. And he saw that people were working 2 or 3 jobs. They didn't have time for church. They didn't have money to tithe. They kept saying, we can't make ends meet. And he kept saying, yes, you can. They said, oh, what do you know? You're just a pastor. You get paid by the church. And he said, well, I'm going to prove that God is faithful. I'm going to prove that God keeps his word. And here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to start bringing in orphans with no visible means of support. And so he went on for decades housing more and more and more orphans. He started with 1 or 2 in a little house he had in Bristol, England. Then it turned into all these massive buildings. And he funded every one of those through faith, through prayer, through trusting God. He never told anybody that he needed a penny, but it all came in. And it's said that he raised over $200 million or so in today's dollars. I kind of wonder if it was even more than that, because he housed a total of 10,000 orphans during the entire time of his tenure and his ministry after he was gone. So who knows? But anyway, I thought, what would George Mueller do? Well, first of all, he wouldn't be in debt. He was very opinionated, as you can imagine, and he hated debt. But I thought, if he was in debt, what would he do? And I thought something outlandish, something that showed crazy trust in God. And so 2 of my friends wanted to meet with me soon after that. Oh, by the way, so it was Sunday morning. So I went to church, and my pastor, for the first time that I remember in 12 years that I had been there, preached on George Mueller. And so I thought, okay, Lord, I think you're trying to get my attention. So the next week or 2, my 2 friends called me out to a Hardee's restaurant and said, hey, how are you going to get out of debt? It looks like you're going to have to declare bankruptcy. I said, oh, no, I've got a plan. I said, I'm going to give my way out of debt. And they said, what? What are you talking about? You're going to give your way out of debt. You can't even afford to pay your interest payments. I said, yeah, I know, but I want to prove that God's faithful. And I sat down with my wife and kids. We had 4 by then, and I told them the same thing. And my wife was, she understood me well enough to say, oh my goodness, you're crazy, but okay, let's try it. So we started giving a set large amount of money every week starting January 1st of 2008. Of course, Talit, I didn't know that we were hurtling down a hole into the deepest financial downturn since the Great Depression. We didn't know that was coming. It looked like it could, and it really did. But so I started giving this set large amount every week. And about 4 weeks later, I met a real estate developer at a restaurant. And I said, yeah, I got this 5-acre tract of land. I've got like $800,000 or $900,000 in debt on it. I was hoping to divide it into 5 1-acre tracts and sell it. Now we got this downturn, and the law says I can't sell it because it's on a private road. I mean, I can't subdivide it. And he goes, yeah, well, you ought to try this. And he told me about this certain loophole in the law. And I said, yeah, I'm completely aware of that. I already fully checked that out. It won't work for me. He said, yeah, well, you ought to think of it differently maybe. And right then this light bulb went off, and I realized, wait, there's a different way to think about that law. And so I called my surveyor. We went down and sat before the County Planning and Zoning Commission 2 days later, an informal meeting. And the lady looks up at me over her glasses when I was done, and I shared this crazy idea to go just do this loophole. And she looks at me over her glasses with this frown, but this little slight smile. And she said, I've been working here for however many years, 30 years or something, and no one has ever come up with such an outlandish idea. But you're right. You can do what you said. I don't know why no one's ever seen this in the law in all these decades. And yeah, I can't stop you. Yeah, I'll approve it. So we went ahead, and it took a lot more work, a lot more money, a lot of sweat and tears and angry phone calls with the bank who wouldn't allow us to subdivide and all this. But we actually ended up selling all 4 of those 5 split up waterfront lots in the very depths of the Great Recession in September of 2008. And we actually were debt free 13 months later.
Wow, that is amazing. Now, when you went out and used this strategy, did you have like certain destinations? I'm splitting it over these charities, I'm giving it to this church, or when you say that you gave every single week a certain amount, how did you decide where to give it?
You know, we were passionate and we are passionate about a number of things. And I'm hoping before the end of the show that you'll give me a chance to talk about my big why. But we gave to our church, and we gave to certain nonprofit organizations like Bible League, which sends Bibles to third world countries and does church planting, and other groups trying to reach unreached people groups with the gospel.
Mm-hmm. And so as a result of you being intentional and really trying God at his word, stepping out on faith and saying, I'm going to give my way out. You believe, and it's your conviction that is the precipice upon which you were able to become debt free 13 months later.
Yeah, I really believe that. I think God clearly did it. I want to put in a caveat here, and I would invite you to argue with me, because that would be fine, because I don't have answers here, and this is your show. But I don't think that. I mean, I think God. I think we can all agree God's not a vending machine in the sky. He wants relationship. He wants us to know Him, and He wants to have this intimacy with us. So I would argue now, based on other experiences in the last 11 years since then, that it's not automatic. I don't think that if you always give, you will always get a return in the timing that you think you should. And I'm thinking about Malachi 3:10 here, test me and see if I won't pour out these blessings in your lap. Well, it's in God's word, therefore it must be an absolute fact. Well, I don't think his timing's always what we want it to be, because I've seen other people give, and I'm not saying their motives were wrong, but it's a different situation. God's not automatically going to do everything the same way. I don't think it always will work just the way I said.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's someone listening who they don't have, $2.5 million of real estate debt, but they have $60,000 in student loan debt. Would you recommend this strategy to them? How would you approach them if they sat down with you and said, should I do this?
Yeah, here's the simplest way I've been able to boil this down when someone else asks me this question. That is, think about and set a target for what you'd like to be making. And I don't mean like something completely outrageous. Like if you're making $30,000 a year, setting a target of, $1 million a year. And what I'm going to say is going to make sense. But set a target, a reasonable target, but a faith target for where you'd like to be, and then start tithing off that number. Mm-hmm. So when we were making, I won't say zero, but we were making very low income when we were hitting bottom here in late 2007. Well, we set a target of $500,000 a year. We said we want to tithe as if we were making $500,000 a year. And that's what we tithed off of.
Man, I love that. I hope everybody wrote that down. I think that's a powerful principle, a powerful goal to strive for, a powerful faith move. And you're an example of the results that could come. And like you said, it is super important to have the right heart. This isn't, I'm doing this so I can get something from God.
Right.
I'm doing this because I trust God. I give to God because I have faith in him, that he is the provider of all of my needs and that he will never fail me, not because I want to just get something specific from God. I think that you hit that out the park when you said that anytime you give in any way, whether that's time, talent, or your finances, the kingdom way to do it is with a pure heart. The Lord says that I love a cheerful giver, and we're not supposed to do it from compulsion, and we're not supposed to do it as any form of manipulation. And I think that because you gave with the right heart, That's why God showed up the way that he did. So that's a powerful, powerful principle. Now, continuing on with the story, you've tried lots and lots of different ways to invest in real estate. There's probably not a formula of real estate investment out there that you haven't at least attempted over your real estate investment career. But you've recently written a book called The Perfect Investment, because, throughout your career and doing all these various things, there's a certain form of real estate that you kind of believe wholeheartedly in is the best way to go about investing in real estate. So can you kind of talk to us a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, almost anybody listening would know that if you have a house, let's say you paid $300,000 for, and that's what the normal price on your street or block is, around 300, and then you put on a big addition and you build out the basement and you changed all the, you changed everything, made it, went to cement board siding and these high-end windows and fancy trim, and you put $600,000 in there, you're probably not going to be able to resell it for $600,000 because, as we know, residential real estate is limited by the comparables or the comps in the neighborhood. They say location, location, location. That applies to residential real estate for sure. But commercial real estate is very different. And I think the reason that most of the Forbes 400 wealthiest people in the world, in America, invest in commercial real estate is because it has something called the commercial real estate value formula. The value formula is what allows us to force appreciation, if you will, and basically increase the value of the property pretty dramatically. The value formula for commercial real estate is the value is the net operating income divided by the rate of return. And so it's the net operating income, so the income from the property with no debt on it, and then the divided by the capitalization rate or the rate of return on the property. It might be, expected rate of return might be 6%, for example. Value of the property by, let's say we can increase the income, the numerator in our equation, by just $1. So let's say we raise rents by $1, or let's say we lower our cost of doing business by $1. So that $1 in income is $12 a year. $12 a year divided by 0.06, which is 6%, the cap rate. So the value is $12 divided by 0.06. That's $200. We just created $200 in additional value to our property by adding $1 a month to the income, okay? And it's even better when there's leverage, because if there's a safe amount of debt on it, that can leverage up that return to being worth 2 or 3 times as much to the investor. And so that's kind of my overview of why I love commercial real estate investing. There's also incredible number of tax savings. Commercial real estate investors pay so little tax. Honestly, tell it that if the American people knew how little we paid, there'd probably be another tax revolt on our hands. And this time it would be against us.
So can you give us like a definition of what you mean by commercial real estate? Because I think maybe when you hear commercial real estate, you might be thinking like a strip mall or something like that. So when you say commercial real estate, what do you mean?
So it could be retail, it could be office, it could be industrial, but what I'm referring to, or it could be medical offices, but what I'm specifically referring to, what I'm specifically involved in, I should say, is multifamily investing. That's large-scale apartment complexes, self-storage investing, and also mobile home parks. Those are 3 very recession-resistant asset classes that have performed very, very well since the recession.
Now, someone might be saying, well, how, because I think even if you have a surface knowledge of real estate investment, probably the first place your mind goes to is, getting a single family home to rent out to someone else. Mm-hmm. So now when you think, wow, commercial, multifamily, how do I access such an investment opportunity? Because that's different from the sense of how much a commercial property might cost, how much you would have to come up with to, do the deal, the rehab. So is this accessible to more people than we realize?
It is now more than ever, and I'll tell you why in a second. But I'll tell you, chapter 3 of my book is what makes a lot of people want to quit reading the book, because it talks about the barriers to entry to commercial real estate, and they're very high. To do a commercial real estate deal on your own, you have to have a very high net worth, like equal to the value of the loan you might take out. So if you're doing an $8 million deal, you might be taking out $5 million in debt. You have to have $5 million in net worth. You might have to have the liquidity in cash, stocks, mutual funds to pay 6 months of the debt payments if something goes wrong in the bank, and you might have to hold it there. You're going to have experience operating this type of multifamily or self-storage or mobile home park. And if you don't have experience, even if you have everything else, you might not get a loan. You're going to have a relationship with brokers. You're going to have to convince the broker and the seller that you're the best buyer. And this is a very hard market to buy in because there's so much competition. So chapter 3 of the book goes over all these barriers, and it makes you want to quit before you even get started. But the great news is there is not only chapter 3, there's chapter 4 and beyond. And that tells us that we can get involved meaningfully in these types of deals through what's called a real estate syndication. Now, if you're an accredited investor or generally a high net worth investor, there's all kinds of opportunities for you to become part of someone else's deal. They're the operator. They do all the work to get it syndicated, to get it all done, and then you just invest passively, and you can get a nice, very nice piece of the profit. If you're not as high a net worth individual, if you're not what they call an accredited investor, there are still many other opportunities that have just popped up since 2014 based on some legal changes that you can do this. You can get involved in some of these deals through what's called crowdfunding. And there are crowdfunding websites that allow you to invest sometimes as little as $5,000 or $10,000 in a deal that you would normally not have had access to in years past.
Are there any of those sites that you would throw out that people should start researching?
Yeah, I think so. I don't have any dog in the fight here, but I'm thinking CrowdStreet, Realty Mogul, Fundrise. Those would be 3 that come to mind immediately. I think there's one that Realty Shares, I think, is another one. But there's one that, is actually having some financial trouble. You can just Google that and see, do some reviews and see which one is the best one to look at. But that's a great way for an investor to invest a fairly small amount through their cash or their self-directed IRA.
So let's say somebody is in position, they have the $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, but they've been, prior to listening to you today, they've been, looking for a single family home that they can invest to, whether that's a flip or a buy and hold or whatever. Then when they've been thinking about real estate investment, that's where their mind is gone. Mm-hmm. So if they're sitting there with $10,000 and they're thinking about investing in real estate, should they go with getting into this crowdfunding situation? Is that a better opportunity than going and getting a single family home to rent out?
I interact with people on a large real estate investment site called biggerpockets.com, and I interact with hundreds of people a year. And a lot of them are spending almost all their spare time trying to find that elusive single family to flip or to buy and hold. And what most of them conclude eventually, whether they're semi-successful, they get partway there and they quit, or they get all the way there, like a guy I talked to from Fargo, North Dakota the other day who had 325 units. Almost all of them eventually get to a point where they say, this is unsustainable. I cannot do this. This is driving me crazy. In these days and age, it's very hard to even get one house to flip because there's so many HGTV shows, and so flipping houses is so popular. So my question to everybody who would be looking for those is, why work harder than you need to make less than you could? And my advice would be to go find a great real estate syndication or a fund. And if you can get in, invest, do a ton of due diligence, do reference checks and background checks and meet them in person and talk to other investors. But once you're comfortable with them and you trust them, it's, to me and to a whole lot of other people, that's a better way to go.
Now, you've done all this work and you're continue to do all this work. And I think what's probably the best part of your story, even though there's been lots of good parts that we've talked about so far, is the reason why you do what you do. I think that the heart behind it, you're not one of these people who is doing these deals, accumulating a net worth for your own personal gains. But you have a much bigger mission in mind. And I think that everybody should have a big mission in mind as to why you're building wealth, why you're working hard to get out of debt, why you're trying to change your financial situation around. So I would love for you to talk about the reason why you do what you do, even to this day.
Is who we are. And who we are today is who we will be when we become super successful or wealthy. And so let's start working on it today. Like I said, I was tithing in advance. Well, let's start living, toward that ultimate goal. And so what we've decided, Wellings Capital, my company, is very, very passionate. We're very upset about human trafficking. And I think when you hear what I'm going to say, I think you'll be upset too if you're not already. Did you know that if you took the record profits, Talit, of Nike, Starbucks, General Motors, and Apple, added those together, double that number, that would be approaching the estimated annual revenues generated by human trafficking, by modern slavery in the world. There is a massive problem on our hands. A new person is trafficked and put into slavery worldwide every 4 seconds. There's 25,000 new modern day slaves going into slavery every day. And I want to believe that if I was in America in the 1800s, I would have been fighting against slavery. I would have been an abolitionist. And I want to believe that if I would have been an adult in the 1960s, I would have been marching and fighting for civil rights. Well, this is a civil rights. It is a civil right. It is modern day slavery. It's not causing a civil war, and it's not headlines of the newspaper like it was in the 1960s, but it is every bit as real and is every bit as horrible as any of that. And it is going on right under our noses. And so I have dedicated myself to trying to fight to basically publicize this issue. And I also am trying to join our profits from our company along with others to try to raise money to fight this great injustice.
Wow, that is incredible, incredible. Is there a way that other people can get involved in the fight?
Yeah. And so I can tell you that I'm part of an organization called freedomplaceproject.com. And we are not actually taking any donations. We're actually going to be raising money. We're going to be raising money to build up to $1 billion office complex in Dallas, Texas. And we are actually talking to people about that right now. And we plan to donate 100% of the profits forever to fight human trafficking. That's what we're doing. But people can find their own way of getting involved. One way to get involved right away is to watch a movie called Nefarious. And you can watch it online for, I think, $3.99. It is a great eye-opener and a great primer to get everyone to realize what is going on. And if you like the movie Nefarious, you can donate to the organization who put it together. They're doing a great job bringing this to light and fighting it. And the organization is called Exodus Cry. That's exoduscry.com.
Awesome. We'll be sure to have links to all of that in the show notes of this episode. So now if people want to learn more about commercial real estate and the perfect investment, can you tell them where to find your book of the same name? Absolutely. So they can go to my website, which is wellingscapital.com. That's WELLINGS wellingscapital.com, or they can buy my book more easily and quickly on Amazon. Awesome. Paul, this has been incredible and eye-opening. We're super glad that we were able to get you on and you were able to share your incredible journey and advice with our audience today. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks, Talent. It was great to be here and a real honor.